A hidden GoPro discovered 14 years later solves a hiker's disappearance. The forest floor was a soft, wet sponge. Rain, not the clean washing kind but a thick misty drizzle, had been falling for hours, clinging to the pine needles and turning the air into a cold grey soup. It was the kind of damp that seeped into your bones, a miserable, persistent chill that no amount of Gore-Tex could truly repel. For 14 years it had been seeping into the earth, into the roots of the ancient hemlocks and the silent, patient stones. For 14 years it had been the keeper of a secret. Leo was not a sentimental man, but the GoPro felt heavier than its few ounces should have allowed. It was a relic, an artifact from a different era of technology. Its plastic casing clouded and scarred, its lens a milky blind eye. He'd found it by sheer dumb luck. A freak gust of wind, a final autumn-browned leaf clinging desperately to its branch, and then the sickening crack of dead wood giving way. The branch, no thicker than his arm, had plummeted from 50 feet up, shattering on the granite outcrop not 10 yards from where he stood. The impact had dislodged a small avalanche of moss, mud, and debris, and in the raw, newly exposed earth, something had glinted. Not the dull gleam of mica or quartz, but the manufactured black of plastic. He'd almost left it. It was junk, trash left by some careless hiker years ago. But something, a flicker of curiosity he hadn't felt in years, made him crouch down, his knees groaning in protest. He'd scraped away the caked mud with a numb thumb, revealing the iconic, blocky shape, a GoPro, an old one, a Hero 2, maybe. He remembered them from his college days, the cameras that promised to make everyone an action hero. Now, back in the warmth of his cluttered cabin, the camera sat on the scarred oak of his kitchen table. A tiny defendant under the harsh glare of the overhead light. His dog, a scruffy mutt named Buster, whined softly from the corner, sensing the shift in his owner's mood. The air, usually smelling of wood smoke and old books, was thick with a new tension. Leo had managed to pry the cracked waterproof housing open with a flathead screwdriver. The camera itself was a mess. The battery was a corroded lump, completely useless. But the memory card, a tiny slip of blue SanDisk plastic, was nestled in its slot, miraculously protected by a thin rubber seal. It was a long shot, 1,000,000 to 1, but the seal looked intact. His hands trembled slightly as he slid the card into the reader connected to his aging laptop. He wasn't sure what he was hoping to find. Pictures of a sunset, some shaky footage of a deer. It was a distraction, nothing more. A way to kill another lonely evening in a life that had become a long, unbroken chain of them. The laptop whirred. The card reader's light flickered from red to green. A folder appeared on his desktop. DCIM, he clicked. Another folder, 100 GoPro. He clicked again. A single video file. GoPro, 0001 mpm. The file size was large. Over 4 gigabytes. That was a lot of footage. The date stamp was what made the breath catch in his throat. October 12, 2011. October 12, 2011, 14 years ago, it was the day the posters went up all over town. The day the search parties started combing the very woods he now called home. It was the day 28-year-old Ethan Hayes, a beloved local teacher, an avid hiker, had walked into the Mount Chamberlain National Forest and never walked out. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. This couldn't be. It was a coincidence. Some other hiker, some other GoPro. But Mount Chamberlain was a vast, unforgiving wilderness. What were the chances that another person would lose a camera in this exact, remote section of the park, on that exact day? His cursor hovered over the file. It felt like defusing a bomb. Every instinct screamed at him to close the laptop, throw the memory card into the fire, and forget he ever saw it. This was a wound the town had long since scabbed over, ripping. It opened again. What good could possibly come of it? Ethan was gone. His parents had moved away, broken by a grief that the community's sympathy could no longer soothe. His fiancée, a woman whose face had been a mask of raw agony on the local news for weeks, had eventually left town. The case was cold. A local tragedy that had hardened into legend. He slipped, people would say. Fell into a ravine. The animals would have you know, but Leo knew the woods. He'd spent the last decade of his life mapping their every ridge and hollow, learning their moods and their secrets. You could get lost, yes, you could get hurt, but to vanish without a single trace? No boot, no backpack, no scrap of clothing. That was different. That wasn't the forest. That was something else. He took a deep, shuddering breath and double-clicked. The video player opened. The screen was black for a second, and then it exploded with life. The color was surprisingly vivid, the sound shockingly clear. It was a first-person perspective, the wide-angle lens capturing a world of brilliant green and dappled sunlight. The camera was mounted high, probably on a helmet or a headstrap, bobbing with the rhythm of a steady athletic gait. The sound was of heavy, rhythmic breathing, the crunch of boots on a dry-packed trail, and the cheerful chirping of forest birds. A man's voice, warm and breathless, filled the cabin. Okay, top of the ridge. View's supposed to be incredible. From here, just another 100 yards or so. It was Ethan Hayes. Leo had never met him, but he'd seen the photos. The smiling, handsome face, with the kind eyes, hearing his voice, so alive, so full of energy and anticipation, was like hearing a ghost. The camera tilted up, showing the brilliant blue of a cloudless autumn sky, framed by the fiery oranges and reds of maple trees. It was beautiful, a perfect day for a hike, a perfect day to be alive. The footage continued for another 10 minutes. Ethan narrating his hike, pointing out landmarks, commenting on the crispness of the air. He was alone, happy, at peace, in his element. Leo felt a pang of something he couldn't name. Envy, maybe. This man had a light in him that Leo had lost long ago. Then, the tone changed. The rhythmic crunch of boots was joined by another sound, the heavier, clumsier tread of someone else. The camera swiveled, the movement quick, jerky. A figure was coming up the trail behind him. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark hunting gear that seemed out of place on this popular, well-marked trail. Hey there, Ethan's voice said. Friendly, but with a new note of caution. Didn't see you back there? You stalking me? He laughed, but it was a little tight. The other man didn't laugh. He came to a stop about 15 feet away. The GoPro's wide lens distorted his features, but it couldn't hide the sneer on his face. You're on private land, asshole. Ethan's breathing hitched. The camera panned down, showing the well-worn trail, the official Park Service marker nailed to a tree. No, this is the Chamberlain Trail, part of the National Forest. Not anymore, the man grunted. His voice was a low growl, the sound of gravel being crushed under a truck tire. This is Sutton property now. My property. And I don't like trespassers. Leo's blood ran cold. Sutton, he knew that name. Everyone in the county knew that name. The Suttons were old money, timber and mining money, and their patriarch, a man named Marcus Sutton, was a figure of almost mythical power and menace. He owned half the county and acted like he owned the other half too. His son Julian was worse. A spoiled, violent degenerate with a rap sheet that was mysteriously short for a man who seemed to court trouble. Leo had seen him in town a few times, always surrounded by a posse of sycophants, his face flushed with booze and arrogance. The man on the screen, even with the fisheye distortion, looked sickeningly familiar. It was Julian. Look, I think. There's been a misunderstanding, Ethan said, his voice placating, reasonable. He was holding his hands up slightly, a gesture of peace. This trail has been public access for 50 years, my map shows. Your map is wrong, Julian snapped. He took a step closer. Now the camera captured him in more detail. The cruel set of his mouth, the dead, flat look in his eyes. He was holding something, a heavy, gnarled piece of wood. A walking stick, maybe, but it looked more like a club. This is all ours. The government can draw whatever lines it wants on paper. We draw the lines on the ground, and you just crossed one. Okay, no problem, Ethan said quickly. The camera bobbed as he started to back away. My mistake. I'll head back down. Sorry to bother you. It's a little late for sorry, Julian said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. The sound was terrifyingly clear, picked up perfectly by the GoPro's microphone. You people. You come up here with your little plastic shoes and your water bottles, thinking this is all some big playground for you. You don't respect it. You don't understand what it is. He took another step. He was closer now, too close. The camera angle was tilted up at him, making him seem monstrous. A giant blocking out the sun. This is our land, Julian repeated, his voice thick with a strange, fervent passion. It's in our blood, and we protect what's ours. Suddenly, there was another voice. Julian, that's enough. The camera whipped to the side. Another man had emerged from the trees. He was older, leaner, with a weathered face, and the resigned, weary eyes of a man who had seen too much. He wore the same dark hunting gear. He looked like a man who belonged in the woods, a man made of sinew and silence. Leo recognized him too. It was Elias Vance, the Suttons' groundskeeper, a quiet, haunted figure who was as much a fixture on their estate as the ancient oaks that lined the driveway. Stay out of this, Elias, Julian snarled, not taking his eyes off Ethan. We had an agreement, Elias said, his voice calm but firm. No trouble. Your father was very clear. My father isn't here, Julian shot back, and this little prick in his bright blue jacket is disrespecting our home. The camera swung back to Ethan, who was still backing away slowly. I'm going right now. No, you're not, Julian said. And then he lunged. The next few seconds were a chaotic, sickening blur. The world tilted violently as Ethan stumbled backward. There was a grunt of effort. The sharp, wet thud of wood hitting flesh and bone. Ethan cried out, a sound of pure shock and pain. The camera fell, tumbling through the air, and for a terrifying, disorienting moment, all Leo could see was a spinning kaleidoscope of green leaves and blue sky. It landed on the ground. Lens up, nestled in a bed of damp ferns. The view was partially obscured by leaves, but the audio was crystal clear. Julian, no. Elias's voice, sharp with panic. A sickening crunch. A choked gasp from Ethan. I told you, Julian panted, his voice a triumphant, ugly thing. Told you to stave off our land. There was the sound of a body slumping to the ground, a dead weight in the leaves. Then, heavy, ragged breathing. Jesus Christ, Julian. What did you do? Elias sounded frantic. What the hell did you do? I did what had to be done, Julian said, his voice cold, devoid of the earlier passion. It was the voice of a man admiring his handiwork. He was a trespasser. He was a hiker. Look at him. He's just a kid. He's a problem. One less problem. There was a long, terrible silence, broken only by the sound of Julian's heavy breathing and the distant, indifferent chirping of the birds. Leo sat frozen in his chair, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. He felt like he was going to be sick. He was no longer a spectator. He was a witness. His car is at the trailhead, Elias said, his voice a low, horrified whisper. People know he's up here. They'll come looking. Let them look, Julian scoffed. They won't find him. We're miles from the trail. We'll take him to the old quarry. No one's been there in 30 years. He'll be just another rock by the time anyone gets close. We, you mean you, Julian. I had no part in this. Julian laughed, a short, ugly bark. Oh, you're in this, old man. You were here. You saw him trip and fall. You're just as much a part of this as I am. My father will want this handled quietly, and you, Elias, are the best at being quiet, aren't you? The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Leo could feel the power imbalance, the raw, brutal leverage Julian was exerting. Elias, the loyal servant, the man who knew where the bodies were buried because he was the one who buried them. There was the sound of something heavy being dragged through the undergrowth. Grunts of effort. The rustling of leaves grew fainter and fainter, and then silence. The camera kept recording. For hours, the sun moved across the sky, its light filtering through the canopy, painting shifting patterns on the fern leaves that partially covered the lens. The sounds of the forest returned. The wind in the trees, a squirrel chattering angrily. The shadows lengthened, dusk fell, turning the world into a palette of deep blues and purples. Night came, and the screen went black, but the audio continued. The hoot of an owl, the distant howl of a coyote, the relentless, maddening chirp of crickets. It recorded for 6 hours and 43 minutes, until the battery finally died and the screen blinked into a final, permanent darkness. Leo stared at his laptop, his face pale, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. He had just watched a man be murdered. He had heard the killers' names. He knew their plan. He was holding a piece of evidence that could shatter a powerful family and solve a 50-year-old mystery. The silence of his cabin was deafening. The only sound was the frantic, terrified thumping of his own heart. He looked at the door. At the dark rain-slicked windows, the woods outside no longer felt like a sanctuary. They felt like a tomb. Julian Sutton was still out there. Elias Vance was still out there. And now, they had a new problem. Him, a hidden witness, separated from them by 14 years of silence, but connected by a tiny blue piece of plastic. He slowly, deliberately, closed the laptop. The click echoed in the small room like a gunshot. The cliffhanger wasn't on the screen. It was in his life. What the hell was he going to do now? The face of Ethan Hayes, smiling and alive, was burned into his mind. He was a teacher, a good man. He had a fiancée, a family. He'd just wanted to see the view from the top of the ridge, and for that, he'd been erased. The injustice of it was a physical thing, a coiling, venomous serpent in Leo's gut. He had to do something, he had to. But the Suttons were not just a family. They were an institution. They were a force of nature in this county, with roots as deep and tangled as the ancient trees in their forest. To go against them was not just dangerous, it was suicidal. He was a recluse, a nobody. Who would believe him? And even if they did, who would be brave enough to act on it? The local sheriff was practically on the Sutton payroll. The thought sent a fresh wave of ice through his veins. He was alone. Utterly, terrifyingly alone. With a ghost on a memory card and a monster still walking free. The man on the screen, the victim, had a name. Ethan Hayes. But to the town of Northwood, he was more than a name. He was a memory, soft focus and tragic, like an old photograph faded by the sun. In the days and weeks after he vanished, the local paper had run dozens of pictures. Ethan smiling at his high school graduation, a diploma in one hand and a goofy thumbs up with the other. Ethan in a canoe, paddle held aloft, a wide grin splitting his face. Ethan in a classroom, leaning over a student's desk, his expression one of patient encouragement. He was the golden boy, the one who had gotten out, gone to a fancy college, and then, inexplicably, come back. He'd turned down lucrative job offers in the city to teach history at his old high school. "I want to give back," he'd told the local reporter in a feature they ran a year before he disappeared. "This place made me who I am." His fiancée was Sarah Jenkins. Her face, too, had been plastered everywhere, but her expression was the polar opposite of his. While Ethan's photos radiated life, Sarah's were a portrait of its absence. Her eyes were hollowed-out sockets of grief, her mouth a tight, pale line of disbelief. She'd been the town's darling, the pretty, clever girl who had captured the heart of its most beloved son. They were the perfect couple, the kind of pairing that makes other people believe in storybook endings. They'd just put a down payment on a small house on Cedar Lane, a fixer-upper. They were renovating themselves. The paper had run a photo of them on the porch, paint-splattered, and laughing, a future of limitless possibility stretching out before them. When Ethan disappeared, Sarah's world had imploded. She'd led the search parties, her voice raw from shouting his name into the unyielding wilderness. She'd pleaded on the local news, her composure cracking, begging for any information, any clue, any sign. "He's strong," she'd said. her voice trembling but fierce. "He's a survivor. He's out there, and he's waiting for us." But as the days bled into weeks, the hope in her eyes had gutted and died, replaced by a haunted, vacant stare. The search was officially called off after a month. The first heavy snows of winter came blanketing the mountain in a shroud of white, and with it, the last vestiges of hope were buried. Sarah had stayed in Northwood for another year, a ghost haunting the aisles of the grocery store, her presence a constant, painful reminder of the town's collective loss. Then, one day, she was gone. The house on Cedar Lane was sold, and the storybook ending was revised into a cautionary tale. The antagonist, Julian Sutton, was a different kind of local legend. He was the darkness to Ethan's light, a creature of rumor and resentment. The Sutton family had owned the vast, untamed swaths of land north of the town for over a century. They'd made their fortune in timber, clear-cutting entire mountainsides, with a ruthless efficiency that was both feared and, in a strange way, respected. Marcus Sutton, the patriarch, was a cold, formidable man who rarely came into town. He ruled his empire from a sprawling stone mansion set miles back in the woods, a place local kids called the Fortress. He was a king in his own kingdom, and his word was law. Julian was his heir, but he lacked his father's cold discipline. He was a creature of impulse and appetite. He'd been in and out of trouble since he was a teenager. Drunk driving, bar fights, accusations of assault that always seemed to evaporate. Before they reached a courtroom, people whispered stories about his cruelty. A dog he'd shot for barking. A tenant farmer he'd beaten half to death over a late rent payment. But they were just whispers. The Sutton name was a shield. Their wealth a get-out-of-jail-free card. Julian moved through the world with the unthinking entitlement of a man who had never faced a consequence. He saw the world not as a community to be a part of, but as a territory to be controlled. The hikers, the tourists, the people who came to enjoy the beauty of the mountains. He saw them as invaders, soft, weak people who didn't understand the harsh realities of the land he considered his birthright. His resentment was a toxic, festering thing. He hated people like Ethan Hayes, hated their easy smiles, their casual confidence, their assumption that the world was a safe and welcoming place. To Julian, the world was a brutal, zero-sum game, and he intended to win. And then there was Ilias Vance, the hidden witness, the third man on the trail. Ilias was a shadow. He'd worked for the Suttons for as long as anyone could remember. He'd lived in a small, dilapidated cottage on the edge of the estate, a man utterly dependent on the family's patronage. His past was a mystery. The common story was that he'd had a family once, a wife and a daughter, but there had been an accident. A fire, something terrible that had left him hollowed out and alone. Marcus Sutton had taken him in, given him a job and a place to live. It was an act of charity, people said. But others whispered it was more of a leash. Elias knew things. He saw things. His loyalty to Marcus was absolute, born out of a strange mixture of gratitude and fear. He was Julian's handler, his keeper. It was Elias's job to clean up Julian's messes, to smooth things over, to make problems disappear. He was the one who would show up with a pocketful of cash after Julian had smashed up a bar. He was the one who would have a quiet word with a potential witness. His voice soft, his eyes promising a world of trouble if they didn't forget what they saw. He was a man trapped in a moral gray zone, his conscience eroded by years of compromised loyalty. He disliked Julian, at times even despised him for his casual brutality. But he was bound to him, tied by a debt to the father that forced him to be complicit in the sins of the son. Leo knew all of this. Not in detail, not in the intimate way the GoPro had just revealed, but in the way everyone in a small town knows the currents that run beneath the surface. He knew Ethan was the town's lost saint, Julian its resident demon, and Elias its silent, haunted specter. He pushed the laptop away, the screen now black, and walked to the window. The rain had finally stopped, but the night was dark and moonless. The forest was a solid wall of black, indistinguishable from the sky. He thought about Ilias's voice on the recording. The initial shock, the panic. Jesus Christ, Julian, what did you do? There was a flicker of humanity in that cry. A man confronted with a line he never thought they'd cross. But it had been extinguished so quickly, replaced by the cold, pragmatic necessity of survival. His car is at the trailhead. People know he's up here. He hadn't tried to save Ethan. He hadn't run for help. He had immediately shifted to damage control. He had helped drag the body. He had participated in the cover-up. He was not an innocent bystander. He was an accomplice. Leo's mind raced, connecting the dots, filling in the gaps of the last 14 years. The official search had focused on the southern ridges of the park. Based on the route Ethan had filed with the ranger's office. But Julian had said, "We're miles from the trail. And then, we'll take him to the old quarry, the old Black Creek quarry." It was on Sutton land. Of course it was. It hadn't been used since the 50s. It was a massive, water-filled pit, hundreds of feet deep. A perfect place to hide something, or someone. The search parties would never have been allowed on Sutton property. Marcus would have made sure of that. A phalanx of lawyers and no trespassing signs would have met them at the gate. The police wouldn't have pushed it. Not against Marcus Sutton. The whole thing was a perfectly executed crime. Enabled by power, wealth, and the silent conspiracy of fear. Julian was the weapon, but Marcus was the hand that wielded it. And Elias was the one who wiped away the blood and hid the evidence. They had gotten away with it. For 14 years, they had lived with this secret. Their lives continuing uninterrupted while Ethan Hayes rotted at the bottom of a quarry. A wave of nausea rolled over Leo. He stumbled to the sink and splashed cold water on his face. His reflection in the dark window was a stranger's, a pale, gaunt face with wide, terrified eyes. He had run away to these woods to escape people, to escape the complications and the noise of the world. He had built a fortress of solitude around himself, a quiet, orderly existence, where the only dangers were the natural ones, a sudden storm, a wrong turn on a trail, the possibility of a bear. But he had been living in a fool's paradise. The real monsters weren't the ones with claws and fur. They were the ones who wore human skin, the ones who could kill a man for the simple crime of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and then go home and sleep in their beds. He thought of Sarah Jenkins. He remembered a specific news clip, an interview from about a week into the search. She was standing at the trailhead, the same one Ethan had started from. Her face was chapped from the wind, her eyes redrawn from crying, but she was trying so hard to be strong. Someone must have seen something. She had pleaded to the camera, her voice cracking. He was wearing a bright blue jacket. You couldn't have missed him. Please, if you were hiking here, if you saw him, if you saw anyone, please. Just call, tell us anything. Leo felt a gut-wrenching certainty that someone had seen. Elias Vance, Julian Sutton. They had seen the blue jacket. And they had extinguished its light forever. Sarah's plea had been broadcast across the county, and 2 men had heard it, knowing the answer. Knowing they held the key to her agony, and they had chosen to remain silent. They had let her suffer. They had let an entire town grieve for a phantom, a mystery, when the truth was so simple, so brutal, so close. The weight of the GoPro's secret was crushing him. It wasn't just a recording of a crime anymore. It was a testament. It was Ethan's last will. It was the only thing that could give him justice, that could give Sarah Jenkins an answer, that could tear down the wall of lies the Suttons had built around themselves. But to reveal it meant stepping out of the shadows and into the crosshairs of a very powerful, very dangerous family. Julian Sutton was a killer. What would he do to the man who threatened to expose him? What would Marcus do to protect his son, his legacy? And what about Elias, a man who had already chosen silence and self-preservation over justice once before? Would he stand by and let the truth come out? Or would he do whatever was necessary to keep it buried? To keep his own role in it hidden? Leo slid down to the floor, his back against the kitchen cabinets, and pulled Buster into his lap. The dog licked his face, whining, sensing his master's distress. The warmth of the animal was the only comfort in the cold, terrifying new world the GoPro had opened up. He was no longer just Leo, the reclusive handyman who lived in the woods. He was the keeper of Ethan Hayes' last moments. He was the only one who knew the truth. And the burden of that knowledge felt heavier than any mountain. He had a choice to make. He could erase the file, destroy the card, and pretend he never found it. He could crawl back into his shell of solitude and let the secret die with him. Or he could light a match and hold it to the foundations of the most powerful family in the county, and pray he didn't get burned alive in the explosion that was sure to follow. The weeks that followed were a special kind of hell. Leo felt like he was living in two worlds at once. In one, he went through the motions of his life. He fixed leaky faucets for the handful of summer home owners who employed him. He chopped wood. He took Buster for long silent walks. But in the other world, the real world, he was a ghost, haunted by the video on his laptop. He'd watch it again and again, late at night, with the headphones on, as if trying to absorb every detail, every nuance of the horror. He'd slow it down, frame by frame, the look of surprise on Ethan's face, the glint in Julian's eye, the way Ilias's shoulders slumped in resignation just before he helped drag the body away. The footage was a virus that had infected his mind. He started seeing them everywhere. He saw Julian's expensive black truck roaring through town, kicking up dust, a middle finger to the world. He saw Elias at the hardware store, buying fencing wire, his face a permanent, impassive mask. Leo would duck behind an aisle, his heart pounding, a cold sweat breaking out on his skin. He felt like he had a target on his back. They didn't know he existed, but the fear was as real as if they were hunting him. The forest, his sanctuary, now felt like a cage. Every snapped twig, every rustle of leaves, sent a jolt of adrenaline. Through him, was it a deer? Or was it someone else? Someone who knew. The injustice was a physical itch under his skin, a constant, nagging pressure. Ethan's cheerful, optimistic voice echoed in his head. Views, supposed to be incredible from here. He'd died for a view he never got to see. He'd died because his simple, innocent joy had been an affront to Julian Sutton's bitter, corrosive nihilism. Leo started digging. He spent hours at the public library, scrolling through microfilm of the old newspapers, reading every article about the disappearance. He saw the photos of the search teams, the maps of the areas they covered. It was all a farce. They had been looking in the wrong place from the very beginning. A misdirection orchestrated by the Suttons' influence and the town's willful blindness. He found an online forum for cold cases. Anonymously, using the library's computer, he posted a vague query. Hypothetical question. What if new evidence emerged in a very old missing persons case? Evidence that implicates a powerful local family. What should the person who found it do? The replies were a mix of encouragement and dire warnings. Go to the state police, not the local cops. Get a lawyer first, be careful. Powerful people don't go down easy, they will destroy you. One comment stuck with him. Truth doesn't matter as much as power, remember that. He knew they were right. He couldn't just walk into the sheriff's office and slap the memory card on the desk. Sheriff Brody was a man who enjoyed the Suttons' annual Christmas goose and the occasional hunting trip on their private land. He was compromised. Leo needed a plan. He needed leverage. He needed to be smarter than them. His first thought was Sarah Jenkins, Ethan's fiancée. If anyone deserved to know the truth, it was her. If anyone would be motivated to fight for justice, it was her. But finding her wasn't easy. She had disappeared from Northwood, and it seemed, from the world. He spent days chasing down digital breadcrumbs. He found her mother's obituary from a few years back, which listed a surviving daughter, Sarah Peterson of Portland, Oregon, a new last name. She'd gotten married, she had moved on, or at least, she had tried to. He found a social media profile for a Sarah Peterson in Portland who looked like an older, more weary version of the girl from the news clips. Her profile was private, but the profile picture showed her with a man, and 2 young children. They were smiling, standing in front of a Christmas tree. A normal life. A happy life. The thought of shattering that life with his terrible secret made him feel physically ill. What right did he have to drag her back into this nightmare? She had survived. She had found a way to heal, to build something new from the wreckage of her past. To call her would be an act of profound cruelty. He would be reopening a wound that had taken 14 years to scar over. He closed the laptop, his resolve wavering. Maybe it was better to let it go, to let the dead stay buried. But the next day, something happened that hardened his heart again. He was in town, picking up supplies, when he saw Julian Sutton. He was getting out of his truck in front of the town's only upscale restaurant. He wasn't alone. He was with a woman, young and beautiful, laughing at something he'd said. He put his arm around her, proprietary and possessive, and led her inside. He looked happy, confident, untouchable. A man without a care in the world. A man who could beat another human being to death with a log and then, 14 years later, be laughing on his way to a nice dinner. The sight of it, the sheer brazen injustice of Julian's happiness, rekindled the fire in Leo's gut. The scales of justice were so grotesquely unbalanced. Ethan was gone, his life stolen in a moment of savage violence. Sarah had her life irrevocably broken, even if she had managed to piece together a new one. And Julian got to live. He got to laugh, he got to love. It was wrong. It was a stain on the world. That night, Leo made a decision. He wasn't going to Sarah, not yet. He wasn't going to the police. He was going to fight the Suttons on their own terms. On their own land. He was going to escalate the conflict himself. He bought a drone. A small, quiet one, with a high-resolution camera. He spent a week practicing, flying it around his cabin, learning the controls until he could maneuver it with pinpoint accuracy. Then, under the cover of a moonless night, he drove to a service road that bordered the vast Sutton estate. He hiked a mile into the woods, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs, until he was at the edge of the property line. From there, he sent up his eye in the sky. The drone flew silently over the manicured lawns of the Sutton mansion. A dark, sprawling fortress of stone and glass, its windows blazing with light. It was a world away from his own small, dark cabin. He saw the fleet of expensive cars in the driveway, the Olympic-sized swimming pool, the tennis courts. He flew higher, over the main house, towards the back of the property, guided by the satellite maps he had studied for days. He was looking for the old quarry. He found it a mile north of the house. It was a huge, ugly scar in the earth, a vast, circular pit filled with water, so dark it looked like a hole in the world. The edges were steep cliffs of shattered granite, surrounded by a dense, impenetrable forest. A chain-link fence, topped with barbed wire, ran along the perimeter, with faded no trespassing signs posted every 50 feet. It was exactly as Julian had described it. A perfect, forgotten tomb. He hovered the drone over the water, his hands slick with sweat. Ethan was down there, somewhere in that cold, black water. The thought was horrifying. For 14 years he had been lying at the bottom of this private lake, his body preserved by the cold, his story untold. Leo's plan was reckless, maybe even insane, but it was the only thing he could think of. He couldn't prove what was in the quarry without a proper search, and he couldn't get a search without showing the video. But if he showed the video, he would be exposed. It was a catch-22, so he had to create the suspicion first. He had to make them nervous. He had to rattle the cage. He began a campaign of psychological warfare. It started small. He used a burner phone to send an anonymous text to Julian Sutton. Just 3 words. "I know, quarry." He could only imagine the effect those words would have. The jolt of pure ice-cold fear, the frantic questions. Who sent this? How do they know? What do they want? A few days later, he struck again. He used the drone to drop a small waterproof package onto the front lawn of the Sutton mansion. Inside the package was a single brand new bright blue hiking boot. A symbolic message, a reminder of the blue jacket Ethan had worn. The Suttons' reaction was immediate. The next day, New security cameras appeared on the trees lining the estate. Security patrols, men in uniforms driving ATVs, began to comb the property lines. They were spooked. They were hunting for the source of the threat. They were hunting for him. The danger only made Leo bolder. He felt a strange, exhilarating rush. For the first time in years, he wasn't just passively observing the world, he was acting on it. He was a force of his own. He was the ghost he was pretending to be. His next target was Elias Vance. He knew from his research that Elias visited his wife's grave at the Old Town Cemetery every Sunday. Leo went there on a Saturday night. He found the simple, weathered headstone, Mary Vance. Beloved wife and mother, 1955 to 1998. He didn't touch the grave. That felt like a desecration. Instead, on the ground, just in front of it, he placed a single gnarled piece of wood, a branch, weathered and heavy, that looked disturbingly like a club. He could picture the scene. Elias arriving the next morning, flowers in hand, his heart heavy with his old private grief. And then seeing it, the club, a symbol of a different death, a different secret, a secret that tied him not to his beloved wife, but to the brutal crime he had helped conceal. It was a cruel thing to do, to poison the one place that held any solace for the man. But Elias was not an innocent. His hands were just as dirty as Julian's. He had made his choice on that ridge 14 years ago. Leo was just reminding him of the price. The tension was escalating just as he'd planned. He could feel it in the air. The town was buzzing with rumors. The Suttons were on edge. Julian was seen arguing with his father in public. Elias looked more haunted than ever, his face pale, his hands trembling. Leo was turning the screws, tightening the vise, but he knew it was a dangerous game. He was prodding a caged animal, and sooner or later, it was going to lash out. The betrayal came from a direction he never expected. He had a part-time job maintaining the grounds of a wealthy couple from New York, who owned a large summer home on the other side of the lake. He'd worked for them for years. He thought they liked him. He thought they were friends. One afternoon, he was clearing brush near their property line when he overheard them talking on their patio. "It has to be him," the husband said, his voice low and conspiratorial. The recluse in the cabin. Leo, he's always been strange, wandering the woods at all hours. He's the only one who lives out this far. But why would he be harassing the Suttons? The wife asked. Who knows? Maybe they had a dispute. Maybe he's just crazy. But I saw him the other day, flying one of those drone things. And Julian Sutton was in town, asking questions, offering a reward for any information about someone trespassing on his land, sending threats. $10,000. Leo froze, hidden in the trees, his blood turning to ice. $10,000. The wife repeated, her voice filled with a new, greedy interest. Are you sure? That's what I heard. All we have to do is make a phone call. The words hit Leo like a physical blow. Betrayal for money. These people, who he had shared coffee with, who he had trusted, were about to sell him out to a killer for $10,000. He backed away slowly, silently, his mind reeling. The game was over. He had overplayed his hand. He was no longer the hunter, he was the hunted. He had to run. The drone footage was the spark, but the diary was the explosion. Leo never intended to find it. He was running. He had packed a single bag, thrown his laptop, and the precious GoPro memory card inside, and was about to abandon his cabin, his life, everything, when a thought stopped him cold. The old quarry. The drone had shown him the location, but the video was the only proof of its significance. If he ran, the Suttons would find a way to discredit him. They'd say he was a disgruntled employee, a maniac with a grudge. He needed something more, something undeniable, something that couldn't be explained away. He remembered Ilias's voice on the recording. The weary resignation, the tone of a man who had been cleaning up messes for a lifetime. A man like that, a man with a conscience, however buried, might need a place to confess. He wouldn't talk to a priest. He wouldn't talk to the police. But maybe, just maybe, he would talk to himself. It was the longest of long shots, a desperate last-ditch gamble. The Sutton security would be on high alert. They would be looking for him, but they would be looking for him near his cabin or on the roads leading out of town. They wouldn't be looking for him on their own property, not now. He would be a mouse hiding in the lion's den. He went in at 3 a.m., dressed in black, his face smeared with mud. He moved through the forest with a silence born of years of practice, circling wide around the main house, his senses on fire. Every dog bark, every distant car engine, sent his heart into his throat. He made his way to the small, dilapidated cottage where Elias Vance lived, a lonely light burning in a single window. He didn't break in, he didn't need to. He went to the old leaning woodshed behind the cottage. It was the kind of place a man like Elias would keep his secrets. A place of solitude and quiet work. The door was unlocked. Inside, it smelled of sawdust and gasoline. In the corner, under a dusty canvas tarp and a stack of old tires, was a small metal locker. It was locked with a simple padlock. A few seconds with a pair of bolt cutters he'd brought, and it was open. Inside, nestled among yellowed photographs and a few rusted tools, were a dozen small, black-bound notebooks. They were diaries. He opened the one dated 2011. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely turn the pages. He found the entry for October 12th. The handwriting was neat, precise, the script of a man who valued order, but the words themselves were chaos. October 12th, 2011. He did it. The boy finally did it. I always knew he had it in him. The sickness. I saw it in his eyes when he was a child, when he'd pull the wings off flies. But I never thought he'd. Not a person. God forgive me, I saw it happen. The hiker was just a man, smiling. He said hello, and Julian, he hit him. With that stick he carries, the one he carved himself. The sound it made, I will hear that sound until the day I die. It was not my fault. I told him to stop. I told him his father. But it was too late. The boy was dead. And Julian, he just stood there. He smiled. He looked proud. He said, "One less problem." Leo had to stop reading, pressing a hand to his mouth to keep from being sick. He was reading a confession, a real-time account of the murder from the man who had stood by and watched. He continued, his eyes flying across the page. He made me help. He said I was in it with him. He said his father would protect us, but I knew what he meant. He meant his father would protect him. I am disposable. I have always been disposable. We took the body to the old quarry. It was heavy. So heavy. We tied it to the old engine block from the collapsed winch house. It sank so fast. One moment it was there, on the edge, and the next, just ripples in the black water. Julian threw the man's backpack in after him. Then he laughed. Laughed. I feel like my soul has been scraped clean out of me. I am a hollow man. I helped a monster hide his sin. Mary, my darling Mary, if you could see what I have become. I do this only to protect the memory of you, the life Marcus gave me after I lost you. But what life is this? I am a groundskeeper in hell. The diary went on for pages, a torrent of guilt, fear, and self-loathing. Elias had documented everything, the way Marcus Sutton had handled the aftermath, the payoffs to the local sheriff, the carefully planted rumors that Ethan had been an inexperienced hiker, prone to taking risks. It was a complete blueprint of the conspiracy. The cover-up was as cold-blooded and meticulous as the murder itself. Marcus had treated it like a business problem, a PR issue to be managed. He had protected his son, his legacy, and in doing so, he had become a monster himself. This was it. This was the weapon. The GoPro video was the visceral, undeniable proof of the act, but the diaries were the proof of the conspiracy. They implicated not just Julian, but Elias, Marcus Sutton, and even the local law enforcement. This wasn't just about a single murder anymore. This was about a systemic generational corruption that had poisoned the entire county. The stakes had just been raised from a personal tragedy to a public scandal of epic proportions. Leo took the diary from 2011 and to others from the following years, which detailed Elias's ongoing torment and his observations of Julian's complete lack of remorse. He put the footlocker back exactly as he had found it. He had to get this to the right people. Not the local cops. Not the state police, who could still be influenced by Sutton's lawyers. He needed to go bigger. He needed to create a firestorm, so large that no amount of money or power could extinguish it. He thought of Sarah. Sarah Peterson in Portland. With her new life, her new family. He had wanted to protect her, to keep her out of it. But he realized now that was his own fear talking. The truth wasn't his to withhold, it was hers. It was Ethan's. She had a right to know what had happened to the man she loved. She had a right to see justice done. And maybe, just maybe, her grief, her righteous 14-year-old anger, was the one thing that could give this story the human face it needed to break through the noise. He fled his cabin just before dawn. He left everything behind except the bag with his laptop, the memory card, the diaries, and his burner phone. As he drove away, he saw headlights coming up his long secluded driveway. His neighbors had made their call. The hunt was on. He floored the accelerator, his small truck skidding on the gravel road, and disappeared into the pre-dawn gloom, heading west. The tension was no longer a slow burn. It was a screaming, high-pitched whine. He wasn't just a witness anymore. He was a fugitive with a bag full of dynamite, and he was about to light the fuse. He drove for 2 days straight, fueled by cheap coffee and terror, stopping only for gas. He didn't use his credit cards. He didn't turn on his real phone. He was a ghost. When he finally crossed the bridge into Portland, the city felt like another planet. A world of concrete and steel, so far removed from the dark. Whispering woods of Northwood, he found Sarah Peterson's address online. It was a modest house in a quiet, tree-lined suburb, the kind of place where kids left their bikes on the lawn. He parked a block away and just watched for an hour, his heart a painful knot in his chest. He saw her come out to get the mail. She looked normal, content. The haunted look was gone from her eyes, replaced by the harried, happy expression of a busy mum. He saw a little girl run out and hug her leg. Sarah laughed and scooped her up. This was the life she had built. And he was about to detonate a bomb in the middle of it. For a moment, he almost drove away. But then he pictured Ethan's face, full of life, and Julian's, full of hate. He pictured the black water of the quarry. He had to do it. He walked to the house and rang the doorbell. His hand was shaking. His mouth was dry. When Sarah opened the door, she looked at him with a polite, questioning smile. She didn't recognize him. Of course not. He was just a stranger. Sarah Peterson, he asked, his voice hoarse. Yes, my name is Leo. I'm from Northwood. The name of the town was like a switch. The smile vanished from her face. The light in her eyes flickered and went out. The haunted look, the one he remembered from the news clips, returned with a terrifying speed, as if it had been lying dormant just beneath the surface all along. What do you want? She asked, her voice flat, cold. I need to talk to you, he said, his voice barely a whisper. It's about Ethan. He held up the bag. I found something. I know what happened to him. The courtroom was a pressure cooker. Every seat was filled. The air was thick with the scent of cheap cologne, expensive perfume, and collective anxiety. It wasn't just a trial, it was a media circus. National news vans were parked 3DAP on the street outside the county courthouse. The story had exploded exactly as Leo had hoped. A viral wildfire fueled by the shocking GoPro footage and the chilling, meticulous evil detailed in Elias Vance's diaries. The quarry murder, they were calling it. Sarah Peterson sat in the front row, a study in stone. She had not cried, not once. Her grief was too old, too cold for tears. It had hardened into something else, a diamond-hard resolve. Her husband sat beside her, his hand a constant, steady presence on her back. When Leo had shown her the video, she had watched it in complete, terrible silence. She hadn't flinched. She hadn't screamed. She had simply watched the last moments of the man she had loved, her face an unreadable mask. When it was over, she had looked at Leo, her eyes burning with a cold fire, and said, "We're going to burn them to the ground." On the other side of the aisle sat Marcus Sutton, a man reduced. His bespoke suit hung on his shrunken frame. His face, once a mask of imperious command, was now a ruin of slack-jawed disbelief. His kingdom had crumbled. His power, which he had thought was absolute, had been rendered useless against the simple, undeniable truth of a digital video file. He was watching his son, his legacy, be publicly vivisected. Julian Sutton sat at the defendant's table, flanked by a team of high-priced lawyers. He was trying to project an aura of arrogant indifference, but the fear was visible in the frantic tick in his jaw, the sweat beading on his upper lip. He had been so sure of his impunity, so confident in the silence his money could buy. He had never imagined that his victim could reach out from a watery grave 14 years later and bear witness against him. The star witness for the prosecution was on the stand. Elias Vance. He had been given a deal in exchange for his testimony. He was a broken man. His face was grey, his eyes hollow. He looked like he had aged 20 years in the past few weeks. He spoke in a low, monotone voice, reciting the facts of the murder and the cover-up, as if reading from a script he had memorized in a nightmare. "And after you disposed of the body in the quarry, what did you do?" the prosecutor asked, her voice sharp and clear. Elias swallowed hard. "We went back to the house. Mr. Sutton, Marcus. He was waiting for us." Julian told him what happened. And what was Marcus Sutton's reaction? "He was calm," Elias whispered. "He asked if we were sure no one saw us. He told Julian he was a fool, but that he would handle it. He said the family takes care of its own." A low murmur went through the courtroom. The prosecutor let the words hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "He didn't suggest calling the police, reporting an accident." "No, ma'am," Elias said, shaking his head. "He said the boy was a trespasser. He said it was a pest control problem." Sarah flinched, the first crack in her iron composure. Leo, sitting 2 rows behind her, felt a surge of pure white-hot rage. A pest. That's what Ethan Hayes had been to them. The climax of the trial. The moment the world was waiting for, was the playing of the GoPro video. The courtroom lights were dimmed. A large screen was lowered from the ceiling. The prosecutor gave a solemn warning about the graphic nature of the content. The video began. The sound of Ethan's cheerful, breathless voice filled the silent courtroom. "Okay, top of the ridge. The brilliant autumn colors, the dappled sunlight, the sense of peace and joy, was all so achingly alive." Leo could feel the collective intake of breath from the gallery. They weren't just watching evidence. They were sharing a man's last moments of happiness. Then came Julian's voice, the ugly, menacing growl. The confrontation played out, each word a hammer blow in the hushed room. The tension was unbearable. People leaned forward in their seats, their faces illuminated by the ghastly glow of the screen. When the moment of the attack came, the lunge, the sickening thud, Ethan's cry of pain. A woman in the gallery screamed. Someone else sobbed openly. The camera's chaotic tumble to the ground was dizzying, nauseating. And then, the audio, that crystal clear, horrifying audio, playing out in the dark. "Jesus Christ, Julian, what did you do?" "I did what had to be done. He was a trespasser." The courtroom was utterly silent, utterly still. The only sound was the recording of Julian's ragged breathing and the indifferent chirping of the birds. Every person in that room, every person watching on the news, was no longer a spectator. They were there, on that ridge, hidden in the ferns, bearing witness to the casual brutality of a murder. The prosecutor let the audio play for another 30 seconds. The sounds of the body being dragged, the whispers about the quarry. It was a masterstroke of courtroom theater. She was letting the killers convict themselves with their own words. When the lights came up, every eye in the room was on Julian Sutton. His face was ashen, his mask of arrogance shattered. He looked small, pathetic, a bully stripped of his power. He stared at the screen, at the empty, silent forest, as if he could see the ghost of Ethan Hayes standing there, pointing an accusing finger. But the cinematic payoff, The moment that would be replayed on the news for years to come did not come from the lawyers or the judge. It came from Sarah. During a recess, as Julian was being led from the courtroom in handcuffs, his lawyers forming a protective bubble around him, Sarah stood up. She walked calmly, deliberately, to the rail that separated the gallery from the court. She waited until Julian was directly in front of her. Their eyes met. His were filled with a mixture of fear and his old, familiar rage. Hers were filled with a cold, clear emptiness. She didn't shout, she didn't scream. Her voice was quiet, almost conversational, but it cut through the noise of the room like a shard of glass. Was the view worth it, Julian? She asked. That the question was so simple, so unexpected. It wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine inquiry, steeped in a 14-year-old ocean of pain. It referenced Ethan's last happy words, the innocent quest for beauty that had cost him his life. Julian stopped dead. His lawyers tried to pull him along, but he stood frozen, staring at the woman whose life he had destroyed. The question seemed to break something inside him. It bypassed his arrogance, his sociopathy, and struck at some vestigial piece of his humanity. For the first time, he seemed to understand the scale of what he had done. He hadn't just killed a man, he had stolen a future. He had murdered a love story. He had erased a universe of happiness. His face crumpled. The tough guy facade dissolved into the terrified, confused face of a boy who had just realized the game was real. He didn't say anything. He couldn't. He just stared, his mouth slightly agape, as the weight of 14 years of unpunished evil finally came crashing down on him. The bailiffs led him away, a hollow shell of a man. The cameras flashed, capturing his face, a portrait of utter ruin. That was the image that went viral. Not the violence of the video, but the silent, devastating justice of that one, quiet question. It was a poetic, perfect twist of fate. Julian Sutton, the man who had killed for a piece of land, for a view, was finally forced to look at the true landscape of his crime. A woman's shattered heart. It was a public execution of the soul, and it was more cathartic, more satisfying, than any prison sentence could ever be. The snow was falling again. Soft, heavy flakes, drifting down from a flat white sky, blanketing the town of Northwood in a familiar silence. It was the same kind of snow that had fallen 14 years ago, the snow that had ended the search and buried all hope. But this time, it felt different. It felt like a cleansing. Leo stood at the edge of the Black Creek quarry. The chain-link fence had been torn down. The no trespassing signs were gone. The place had been transformed. It was no longer a secret tomb, it was a memorial. A simple granite monument had been erected near the cliff's edge. It didn't have a lot of words. Ethan Hayes, 1983 to 2011. A son, a fiancé, a teacher. He just wanted to see the view. Below the inscription, a small bronze plaque had been added, paid for by an anonymous donor. It was a quote from Ethan, taken from that old newspaper article. "I want to give back. This place made me who I am." The quarry had been searched. Of course, divers had spent weeks in the cold, black water. They had found him. They had found the backpack. They had found the engine block he was tied to. They had brought him home. The funeral had been a town-wide event. People had come from all over the state, old students, former colleagues, friends who hadn't seen him in years. Sarah had been there, standing with Ethan's elderly parents, who had flown in from Florida, their faces etched with a grief that was both fresh and ancient. Leo had stood at the back, a stranger among the mourners, feeling like a ghost at his own strange victory party. Julian Sutton had been sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The video, the diaries, and Ilias's testimony had left no room for doubt. Marcus Sutton, his empire in ruins, and his name, a synonym for disgrace, had been charged with obstruction of justice and accessory after the fact. He had suffered a massive stroke before the trial began, and now resided in a private care facility. His mind gone, his kingdom of silence now a prison inside his own skull. Elias Vance had received a reduced sentence of 5 years for his cooperation. He had accepted it without a word. a man seemingly grateful for the punishment he had evaded for so long. The town of Northwood was healing, but it was a painful, awkward process. The wound that had been ripped open was closing, but the scar would be deep and permanent. The Sutton name, once a symbol of power, was now a curse. The story had become a dark legend, a cautionary tale about the secrets that can fester beneath the quiet surface of a small town. Leo's life had changed completely. He was no longer a recluse. He was a reluctant hero. His face had been on the news. People in town would stop him, shake his hand, thank him for what he did. They called him brave. He didn't feel brave. He felt tired. The constant adrenaline and fear that had fueled him for months had drained away, leaving a profound emptiness in its wake. He had sold his cabin in the woods. He couldn't live there anymore. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was filled with echoes. He had bought a small house in town, not far from the one Ethan and Sarah had been fixing up all those years ago. It felt strange to be surrounded by neighbors, to hear the sounds of life around him. A car crunched to a stop on the gravel behind him. It was Sarah. She got out and walked over to stand beside him, pulling her coat tight against the cold. Stood in comfortable silence for a long time, watching the snow fall on the dark. "Still water, they say it's one of the deepest quarries in the state," she said finally, her voice soft. "It's strange. For so many years I imagined him lost somewhere in the woods, alone. But he was here, so close." "I'm sorry, Sarah," Leo said. The words inadequate. "I'm sorry for all of it. For what you had to go through, for dragging you back into it." She turned to him, a faint sad smile on her face. "Don't be sorry, Leo. You gave me the truth. It's a terrible, ugly truth, but it's better than the not knowing. The not knowing, it's a different kind of prison. You set me free from that." She looked back at the monument. "You set him free, too." She had told him about her life in Portland. Her husband, a good, kind man who had known her story and had loved her through her grief. Her children, who had filled her broken world with a new kind of light. She was going back to them tomorrow. Her long 14-year vigil was finally over. "What will you do now?" she asked him. Leo shrugged, watching his breath plume in the cold air. "I don't know. Fix things, I guess. It's what I'm good at." He thought about the broken trust in the town, the broken faith in justice. Maybe there were things he could help fix here, in the real world, outside of his fortress of solitude. Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled something out. It was the GoPro. Old, scarred, its lens still milky and blind. The police had given it to her as part of Ethan's personal effects. "I think this belongs to you," she said, holding it out. "You found it. It's part of your story now too." Leo looked at the small, battered camera. It was just a piece of plastic and electronics, but it felt like the heaviest thing in the world. It was a symbol of so much cut, of a life cut short, of a secret kept, of a truth finally revealed. It had destroyed a family, but it had also delivered a kind of justice. It had caused immeasurable pain, but it had also brought a kind of peace. He took it from her, his fingers closing around the cold plastic. He felt a connection to Ethan then, a man he had never met but knew so intimately. A man who had just wanted to see the view, and whose last, silent wish had been granted, in a way. The whole world had seen his truth. They stood there for another minute. Two strangers bound by a ghost on a memory card, as the snow continued to fall, covering the raw scars of the past in a blanket of pure, white, and final silence. The echo of the story would linger, a haunting reminder of the cost of truth. But here, at the edge of the world, a measure of peace had finally been found.